My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Google Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the Glowcloud team.
Welcome everyone. Apparently my microphone was muted somehow and I didn't actually realize it. So welcome everyone. I am Mike Gibbs and I am here today to help you build your career. I was trying to say, I remember in the beginning of my career when I wanted to be a network architect, I really had no idea what to do. I took boot camp after boot camp after boot camp. I went and got like 6 certifications. And in the end of the day, that was not enough to get me to my goal. Now I got some guidance, and it was some precision guidance and expert guidance. 3 months later, I was working as a senior network engineer. 3 months after that, I was working as a lead architect at the world's largest internet service provider. And within 2 years, I was working as a principal architect. And the point is, you can too. If you know where to go, if you know what to focus on, if you know what not to focus on, if you know where to invest versus not invest, that's why I'm here. And I come once per week to help you build your career. So bring me any questions that you have, and that way I can help you in any way that I can. And I really want to help you. That's all my goal is. So bring me your career questions and I would help you. Now, I did also want to mention before we begin that tomorrow we actually have a webinar on how to become a security architect. Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but tomorrow our webinar will be on how to become a security architect. And that's completely free. I'm sorry, it'll be an enterprise architect webinar tomorrow. And on tomorrow's webinar, we'll discuss the enterprise architect career. We will discuss how to become an architect, the steps to be hired to be an enterprise architect. And if you have a goal of security architect or solutions architect or AI architect or cloud architect, that's fine. I'll discuss those careers for you as well. If you want to know why you're not getting interviews and you don't know why, I can tell you. I'll happily look at your resume or LinkedIn profile and tell you exactly. You're not getting hired on an interview and you want to know why? I'll give you a quick assessment and I will tell you exactly why and what you need to learn along the way to get that job. So please join me on that free architecture webinar tomorrow. And Chris can just pop the link into the chat box. Now, the other thing I wanted to let you know is in the description of this video, we've got free resources that'll help you become, say, an AI architect or a cloud architect or another type of an architect. So keep that in the back of your mind. And then The last thing that I wanted to say is we have 50% off. We are celebrating the Labor Day holiday still, team. So temporarily, there is 50% off using the Labor Day coupon. Chris will drop that link and coupon into the chat box for you. And then bring me your questions because I'd love to answer them. Chris, you can begin by bringing in the questions after you pop those links in. Tew and Hughes, welcome back. It's always so good to see you. Hi, Mike. Is there a particular industry or domain which might be looking for more architects than others? So, and then what would the top ones be? So let's talk about what we do as architects. You see, as architects, what we do has nothing to do with engineering. Engineering is all about building it. And as architects, our job is about creating a strategy. How do we help that business do business better with the AI? For example, it could be maybe we've got a hospital that wants to increase the quality of their care and make less errors, and they want to use an AI recommendation engine to do so. The technology supports the business goal. Or maybe I have an airline that wants to determine the best time to buy their fuel option contracts. They're going to need an AI strategy to do so, and they're going to need an architect to design that system for them. Of course, the engineers will build that system. So keep that in terms of what we're doing. We are there to enhance performance. So every organization that has technology as a competitive advantage needs architects. Everyone that uses technology as a competitive advantage. And then I want you to think about some companies that have used it better than others. Walmart has an incredible technology system which enables them to have low prices and still have great profits. Look at the amount of money that money that is being generated, both revenue and net income, at Meta for basically hosting people up to post each other's content. They found a way to leverage the technology to make a whole lot of money on it. Now let's talk about a bank, Tew and Hughes, that needs trading systems that trade faster than people algorithmically. And let's talk about banks that are using AI to determine which look like better opportunities, what to buy, to sell, or whatever, or when to buy options or something. So any business that uses technology is there. Now, having said that, the more money the businesses get out of their technology, the more they're willing to spend. You know, Meta is an AI company. It always has been. It's all been about data, right? And they literally offered somebody a $250 million pay package to join them because that person can help them make more money. So now, after I said all of that, who typically makes the most money off of technology? Banks. Banks are constantly hiring architects, and they are among the highest paying people in the world. For example, there was 1 year at Goldman Sachs where the average bonus was $600,000 per employee. It was right around 2009. Average employee, and they have lots of technology employees there too. So, you know, in a big bank, you can earn some serious money because to them, if they throw $1 billion at it and they know how to get $3 billion back, they're going to do it all day, and they have the money to do it. So often your highest pay is in the banking world. Now, who else where I've worked as an architect? I've designed systems for internet service providers. They need a lot of technology, so they make money off of technology. They tend to need them. Now, when we get into healthcare, they need architects too. Now, it's a little different. They don't typically have as much of a budget. So if I were to work at a hospital as a healthcare architect or a healthcare CIO, I might earn this. But by comparison, I worked at Cisco as a healthcare architect and was paid this. So certain companies are more there. Now, if you're at a vendor, the vendors want to use you to actually help sell. So for those things, you're typically good and you're there. So every domain needs it. Now, who typically doesn't need an architect? Small businesses. Because you're not going to have a team of 30, $300,000 a year people as architects, total cost, loaded salary plus other stuff. If technology is not a competitive strategy to you, it's just too much money. So it all depends on the business and the business needs, but there are opportunities everywhere. Now, if you're now talking about individual architecture worlds, well, let's talk about where the biggest shortages are right now. Enterprise architecture is one of the hardest jobs to hire in the world, and 50% of enterprise architects don't come from a tech background. So, I mean, that's a hard one to find. So there is always huge demand for enterprise architects. What is enterprise architecture about? Optimizing the business, people, processes, and technology. Now let's look at security architecture. After enterprise architecture, that's probably my favorite career. So globally speaking, there's a shortage of cybersecurity people by about 5.5 million people. But to find a security architect or someone that knows security and how to design and how to change the culture and how to do everything with that is near as possible. And here's the reason why. People work as security engineers for 10 years and they think it's going to teach them architecture, but it won't, because it's a completely different career. And for example, when that happens, for example, when a security engineer goes for a security architect interview and they don't have the business acumen, the leadership, the executive presence, the emotional intelligence, the sales skills, the business skills, the leadership skills, they don't get hired. In fact, literally speaking, the stats are like 60% of all security architect interviews end because the person confused an engineer with an architect. So the point is, but security is a tough one because we're short of all cybersecurity people. And when it comes to security architects that have the skills they need, there is almost no one. So that is the perfect end of the supply and demand curve. Now, if you look at AI architecture, and that I have David Lithicum teaching that for us because he's the ultimate AI person. I mean, he's been in AI since 1985, before people even realized it exists, and then worked at NASA in the 90s because of his AI, and has been doing AI projects forever. I've only worked on AI with AI since 2001. So we have to focus on that. So in those particular cases, he's teaching AI. Every business is investing with AI. Every business, everywhere. And they're investing with fever and fury because they know that AI is the ultimate competitive weapon. The question is, do they know how to architect it right? So that's another real sweet spot. Now, generally speaking, there's a massive shortage of people that know cloud computing. Sure, I can find millions of AWS certified people out there, but they don't know cloud computing. I need someone that can determine how and where to put my workloads, when they go in the private cloud, when they go in the public cloud. What are the architectural trade-offs if I go this way versus this way? Why can't I use this AWS proprietary thing in my network? If I do, what do I lose? How do I address the technical debt? So cloud architecture is another great one. So those are typically the best ones that I know, typically speaking. I love network architecture too, but it's more of a little bit of a specialized thing. And as things go halfway more cloud-based, I don't know that I would put as much emphasis into that role. But I will tell you, if you're a network architect like a Russ White, you've got any job anywhere, anytime you want, or an Ivan Pepinajak, or me in my day when I was doing that in network architecture. There's a shortage of people that know networking too. Chris, let's go to the next one. How long should you stay in your role as a security engineer before transitioning as an architect? Jason, spend no time in the role of a security engineer. And here's the reason why. Every minute you're learning security engineering, you're not learning security architecture. And let me tell you the difference. In your role as a security engineer, let's say you worked as a network security engineer, you're going to be configuring firewalls. You're going to be configuring IDS, IPS systems, potentially configuring QoS on the network, potentially configuring access lists on the network, rate limiting, traffic shaping, those kinds of things a network security engineer would do. Now, that is a wonderful thing, Jason, but here's what it won't teach you how to do, which is the actual job of the architect. How would you design the zero trust strategy for your customer that's got a data center and 4 clouds? The engineering won't teach you that. And I love engineers, and security engineers are very important, but you won't, by spending time in engineering, learn architecture. Now, the next thing I would ask you is, as an engineer, you probably don't know how to examine the organization's assets, how to determine what the risks are. How do you recommend a risk mitigation strategy? How do you know when to recommend a technical control? How do you know when to accept the risk, transfer the risk to an insurance company, that kind of thing? That's going to be a big part of your job. Now, as an engineer, where you're getting all this hands-on expertise, it's in one of the very small domains. And I need you to approach security architecture at the level of, what are we doing on the network? What kind of things can we do network security, whether it's an ACL, whether it's a firewall rule, whether it's this, traffic shaping, traffic policing. And then a minute later, I need you to start going into the application architectures and determining what kind of things need to be done from an application perspective. Things like input validation or sanitation, things like that. And then 30 seconds later, I need you to understand the different types of I am we would use. And then when should I use a context-aware I am strategy versus an attribute-based strategy versus a role-based strategy, and explain the strengths and weaknesses to me. And then at that same time, I need you to actually know how to actually design the physical security for the building. And at the same time, then write a security strategy and then map it out to a zero trust. So there's nothing wrong with engineering. Nothing. I love engineers and they are absolutely terrific. Just understand, if you want to become a security architect, you're going to have to get the same training after 3 years of working as an engineer as if you started yesterday. And Jason, I have people coming to me with engineering experience for decades. And engineering just doesn't, it doesn't get you there faster because it's very different. Because as an architect, you're going to have to convince the C-suite and the board to invest $50 million in their security architecture. You'll have to. What I'd love to do is I'd love to bring you to our architecture webinar tomorrow for the Enterprise Architect one. And I also would recommend inviting you to the Security Architect webinar we do next week. Chris, if you have the opportunity to do that, or at least one of them. Because I'd love to meet you. I'd love to see what you learned. I'd like to see what you learned via other things. Maybe you have a sales background, or maybe you present really well, or maybe you've got very deep understanding of how it works, not just how to build it. And then I can tell you which skills will carry over and which skills you should learn. But you don't build a career as a physician by working as a nurse. You don't build a career as an airplane pilot by working as a flight attendant. They're great jobs. You're going to learn a lot of things, and you're doing a very important job. So I'm not saying don't stay in engineering, but if you want to be an architect, want to be an architect, what I would do is, starting today or tomorrow, I'd start learning architecture. And as soon as you know architecture, I'd go get an architect job. Hope that helps. Chris, we can bring in the next one. Hi, Mike. Can I share knowledge about job and career satisfaction for the various architects? So there are two sets of people that I've met in architect roles. Either they're people that wanted to be architects in the first place. Those folks love their jobs. For example, Ian came to me over in the UK, wanted to be an architect, and he went over to Capgemini, and he's constantly telling me, Mike, I love this job. I can't believe it's as great as you said it is. Yesterday, I just spoke to Coyote. He was a student of ours. He went over to AWS as a solutions architect. He was a college student before he went to AWS. And I spoke to him yesterday morning, and he's a fireball. He's been promoted a couple of times, and he loves it. Yvonne was another student of ours that went over to AWS, and I speak to him all the time, and he loves it. Jermaine absolutely loved it. Now, at the same time, I've taken many engineers like Jazz, for example, who's over at AWS, and he loves it. He absolutely loves it. And Srinivas is a student of mine, and he would have been an engineer, and he's now in an architecture role, and he seems like he's having so much fun. Now, occasionally, I get people that really want to be a hands-on technical person. I'd say this is about 2% of the architects that I know. But basically, in this case, you've got someone that was like the best software developer out there. They looked at the future and said, I better get out of software development because AI might eat my job. And then they move into an architect role, and now all of a sudden they have to talk to people. And they are not happy because they want to be touching the tech. And they want to touch the tech, and they want to touch the tech because they love touching the tech. Those folks tend not to be happy. But all in all, generally speaking, those folks that are really that good at the tech tend to move up into principal positions anyway, like principal engineer or distinguished engineer. And then they're equally valuable an architect, but more on a technology strategy, where I'm on the technology and business side. So, you say it's that, but most people in architecture roles are thrilled. And I can put it in the context of the hard jobs that I had in my life. The first hard job that I had was I was a paramedic for 7 years. That's how I paid for my way through college. Went to school part-time for 7 years, a little less than that. I worked full-time as a paramedic, and I actually had a second job. That was tough. For about a month, I worked as a registered nurse after I graduated nursing school, and that was the hardest thing I've ever seen. I have such respect for anybody that can actually work as a nurse. Then I went and practiced internal medicine, went back to school for a couple of years as a nurse practitioner, and I liked that. That was a job, but it was a brutal job. I left my house at 6 o'clock in the morning, round patients at the hospital, saw my patients in the office, did rounds, got home, and I was dead exhausted. Then I got a job as a senior engineer for 3 months. And that was almost as bad as nursing. I was basically, I walked in, even though I had no experience. I basically had a CCIE at the time. I had it like 2 months later. I walked in and I was teaching half of the people that had been there for 10 plus years. So every time something broke, it was bring it to Mike, bring it to Mike. Oh, this is critical. Come in at 3 o'clock in the morning. That taught me that was a rough job. And all of a sudden I got my first architect job, TAW 3000. And instead of coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning to go code, they're like, Mike, have a conversation with these people. See what they're actually looking for. Mike, I think it would be a good idea for you to build a relationship with your clients. Play golf with them this weekend, take them out for some steaks, some scotch, some lobsters. Of course, they paid for that. And so that was that. And then it was, Mike, I know that you're in Florida, and I know you're doing an executive briefing in San Jose. Would you mind being in London 2 days from now and give a presentation there? So I'd go to London, give a presentation. Then I'd go back home. I'd work from my home. I'd coordinate a team and work with that team. And all in all, I was leading a team and I was no longer doing the work. So for me, this was the best job I ever had. All of a sudden, someone's paying me 200% and 300% that I earned as an engineer. And the engineers were working so hard, which is why I respect those engineers so much. They really work hard and unfortunately aren't compensated for it. And I'm an architect job, and instead of doing the work, I'm taking someone to lunch. So a pretty good job. Best job I've ever had, which is why I've loved it for so many years, and which is why I teach it. I'm retired, and in my retirement, I just really want to create the next generation of architects. This is my life's work. It's David Lithicum's wife's work, and he spent a lot of time teaching with us. It's what we love doing. And so I think it's the best job in the world. Best job I've ever had. Chris, let's bring in the next one. Are $1 million AI architect salaries a real thing? Well, Meta just hired somebody for $250 million. The package was a $125 million sign-on bonus and a $125 million pay. Oh, so the answer is yes. That's basically $1 billion architects that you're actually talking about there. But the key to any architectural role is what drives your salary. There's two things that drive your salary. Let me do a quick Google and see if I can share this. Hold on. What comes up today? Okay, so here's what really drives it. And I'll show you a couple things along the way. The first thing I want to do is I just share a screen, make sure I got the right one. Look at this. Oops. Chris, if you could share that for me. So I just Googled average salary per people with strong business acumen on salary.com. And look what you notice. Look what you see at pay. You're dealing with an average salary of $727. And why is that? Why is it that job in these particular jobs pay so much? Well, the key is we can make a difference in that business. So where one person is in there thinking about the company's firewalls and planning the trade-offs in those firewalls, an AI architect that's going to look at the organization that has the ability to start at the C-suite. And while they start at the C-suite, for example, of course, you can take that down, they have the ability to understand strategy. This person has the ability to be seen by a billionaire CEO as a peer that can advise them and give them strategic advice. Someone that has the ability to say, increase their sales by 2%, or decrease their operating costs by 5%, or enhancing employee productivity or output per employee by 3%, and can quantify that value. Now, an architect that can do that can help an organization sell an extra $75 million a year, giving them $1 million is nothing. So it all depends on work. So I'd like you to see the difference between price and actually value delivered. And there's a reason that I want to talk about the difference. If you buy something for $100 and it does nothing for you, You just lost $100. Now, by comparison, if I give you something if you buy something from me that it's $1,000 and it's worth $5,000 3 months later, that was the best bargain you ever got. If it went from 5,000 to 50,000 or a couple months later, that was really cheap. So when we executives and we executive architects are going to the actual C-suite, we're speaking their language. We're building a business case. We can look at the macroeconomic environment out there and forecast how that's going to change. We can look at the regulatory environment and understand its impact on that business. And then maybe we can create a technology strategy to work around that new business challenge. That architect earns more money than you can think of. So if you ever notice when I talk about, and you notice in our training, we spend a lot of time on business acumen and executive presence and CXO relevancy and the ability to give a big presentation. That's because it raises your salary and because it makes you so desirable to employers. They start forgetting about your lack of experience. Now, when you use these same things, which is why we came up with the executive architect program, more literally speaking, we took those same programs and then we had business school professors coming in to teach things that would be in an MBA program. We had other executives. We added additional executive training because in these big architecture roles, that's where you have two choices. You get executive training or you do what I did, which is go get an MBA for the business acumen. And then I took about $100,000 of executive training things and then had an executive coach. Training on CXO relevancy, training on the ability to walk in and command the room, training on better to be a better consultant. If you train with us, we teach these things. But if you don't, it's part of your career. You've got to be able to walk into an organization, assess their business, understand their business goals, understand if they want to do something in the next 5 years, what you need to do to help them get there. That's the big architect. It's not the techie. It's the big one. And it could be techie when it's a world where somebody doesn't know anything. So in a world where we're looking for some AI people that are leaps and bounds above other people, that's why companies like Meta are offered somebody a $250 million pay package, $250 million, $250 million. And they're not the only people that have done it recently. Hope that helps. Do solutions architects primarily focus on implementation? Tommy J, solutions architects would not be allowed to touch that technology at most companies. They design the solution, they present it back to the customers buy it, and then the solution architect goes to the next customer to do that same thing again and again and again. So here's something you can think of. If the word architect is truly there in a real job title, we're not allowed to touch the technology, which means we don't code, we don't configure, we don't implement. The only technology tools you will ever use as an architect are the following. You will, in most cases, be using Microsoft Word because you're going to have to write very pristine documents. You will be using Microsoft PowerPoint to generate very pristine presentations that you will use. You will be using Microsoft Excel to help craft business cases from time to time, and you will occasionally use a graphics program to draw something. Occasionally, engineers do a lot more drawing than we actually do. We do a lot more writing and presenting. So you will need a graphics tool. I've used PowerPoint for the last 20 years as an enterprise architect. Prior to that, I used to use Microsoft Visio. You can use Draw.io, Lucidchart, Archimate, but these are just simple tools that you can use. But no, solutions architects, generally speaking, don't touch the technology. And if it's a role where it's called a solutions architect and they're touching the technology, what it's called is a design engineer. What it really is a design engineer. And a design engineer is someone that does technical design and building it. And here's the difference. If it's a real architect, 60% of their time is going to be involved in stakeholder management, meaning meetings with executives, meetings with other key stakeholders, getting stakeholder requirements, negotiating in between stakeholders, meeting with the various vendors along the way, meeting with the clients, meeting with the users of the system. And even as a solutions architect, when you get to the principal solutions architect like me, you might have to lead a team of 15 to 50 people as well. And that's where I started in my architecture career. But no, solutions architects, generally speaking, don't touch the technology. Chris Bingo is the next one. Alex Green, you seldom get interviews. 95% through LinkedIn. Many times you are ghosted and the role gets filled. Is there a strategy or advice that drives better results? Alex, I don't know what your LinkedIn profile is. If you want to share me with your LinkedIn profile, I can tell you. If you want to share with me the messages you've been posting on LinkedIn, I could potentially tell you, but without actually knowing it, I couldn't do it. So why don't I do this? Why don't I invite you to the next webinar? And on that webinar, show me your LinkedIn profile and show me your resume. And I will tell you exactly why you either are or not getting something. And that's the only way to diagnose that more accurately. How does a solutions architect interact with AI? Meaning, what does the AI architect hand off to the solutions architect look like? That's a fair question. So let's start with let's have a little fun. Let's map out an architectural organization, and then after we map it out, let's look where everybody plays, and then I'll show you how this works. So in some companies, not all, but in some, at the top of the organization, what we're going to have is we're going to have a CIO. Let me just talk about the architecture organization. So right up here, you're typically going to have the CIO. And underneath that person, you're often going to have a chief architect. And underneath that chief architect, and this chief architect could be a $500,000 to $1 million position in many cases. Underneath that chief architect, you typically have your enterprise architects. So this is an executive, complete executive. This position is basically the chief architect is another executive position. Oops, I don't know what I did there. So this is another executive. And it's like an 80% business role, 20% tech role. The chief executive is 100% business, sorry. Now, when we get next to the enterprise architect, now this architect is at least 80 to 90% business. And that means the rest of it's technical. So this is barely technical. In fact, not the enterprise architects we train, because we also train them alongside our cloud architects. Typically speaking, enterprise architects have very little knowledge of technology, but our focus in enterprise architecture is truly to create that strategy to align the people, processes, and technology. If we go down one level in today's world, and this is why it's going to look like this, we have the multi-cloud architect like we train. Because nothing looks like an AWS Solutions Architect certification ever. You're never going to see that unless it was created by a sales rep at Amazon and the customer decided to say, okay, fine, but you'll never see that. So now when you deal with a multi-cloud architect, I want you to truly understand what we're talking about and why this can't be more than 25% tech. This is still going to be 75% business. And it's going to be 25% tech max. And as you move up into more senior positions, it'll be even less tech. Now, why is this? Because this cloud architect here is now dealing with 3 data centers, or 1 to 2 data centers, 2 to 3 cloud providers, and some co-location providers. Now, this multi-cloud architect is dealing with all the networking, all the security, all the AI, all the applications, all the everything. And I promise you, you can't learn them all. Cisco had like 5 different CCIEs, and each one of those is more than most people would ever achieve in their lifetime. And the 5 different CCIEs were related to 5 different topics just in networking. To put that into context in terms of knowledge base. So at this point, you are going to have a lot of architects to help you. So what you will typically have is you will have your AI architects that are going to provide guidance, and they will provide guidance to the multi-cloud architects who will be providing guidance upwards to the enterprise architects and chief architects. You will have the network architects doing their thing to make sure you've got your networking. And then I'll show you where the solutions architects come in and why we often why the solutions architect is such an entry-level position and why we like to start people there. And it's I've gotten people enterprise architect jobs as their first one, security architects, but why it's often so easy after proper architecture training to get an actual solutions architect job. Now this is a security architect. Now we're going to have an application architect. So we're going to have a lot of architects over here. Now, we're also going to get people that want us to use their cloud stuff coming in. So we're going to have an account team comprised of an account manager, which is the sales rep, and a solutions architect. So AWS will be sending us their solutions architects, the cloud multi-cloud architect, to try to recommend and sell us to believe in these, to then convince our board and others to use these things. And we'll have these people coming in from Microsoft that are going to try and sell us some stuff as well. And that's where those solutions architects come in. They're pre-sales trying to give us some guidance. Now, when we have our AI architects, this is the reality. This is going to be an AI architect, and maybe half the workloads or more are done in the data center, and half the workloads are done in the cloud. And that AI architect will advise the rest of these architects, because that's their strategy. They're the specialist here on exactly how to tune it and what the best way we could possibly do it and why it should be in the data center versus the cloud. We're going to have network architects that are going to be talking about our BGP peering and our routing. And do we do hub and spoke? Do we do full mesh? Do we do point-to-point in our network architectures? Where do we route summarize? Where do we aggregate? And our security architects are going to be looking at our DMZs and our application security and our physical security and our encryption strategy and our data loss prevention strategy, and all of that they're going to be focused on. So they're also going to get a solutions architect, set of solutions architects that are going to come to them. So, for example, if you're an AI architect, you're going to have NVIDIA solutions architects that are going to come to you, and they're going to be trying to sell you their stuff, design, present, and convince you to do it on their stuff. And if you're a network or if you're a security architect, you're going to have solutions architects and sales reps. This is going to be a Cisco solutions architect, and maybe Palo Alto is another solutions architect. And that's what the solutions architect do, which is what architects do, which is why it's such an entry-level position. They're focused typically on one vendor stuff to try to convince us as security architects, for example, to use their stuff, and then help influence the enterprise architects and chief architects and the CIOs to spend money. So that's kind of the play between these, and that's kind of what it is. So I'll bring it back to reality. The world I know and spent most of my life in is medicine. So here's what the enterprise architect is, the cloud architect. In America, if you go to your family doctor and you have high blood pressure, they say, okay, I'd like you to go to the cardiologist. The cardiologist comes, treats the patient, makes recommendations to us and the patient, and we follow those recommendations. Now, that same patient has a kidney issue. I send them to a nephrologist. The nephrologist makes some recommendations, and we add that to their plan. All of a sudden, that patient has diabetes. I send them to the endocrinologist, and they come back to us. And I'm getting all that information from the various experts for their care plan. Same thing for architecture. We create an architecture team just like the physician's medical team would be, which is why I really learned a lot about architecture by learning how to practice medicine. It was great architecture training because we had to ask a lot of questions to actually find the problem and then build the plan around the problem, which is exactly architecture. Great question. Chris, bring on the next one. AWS Azure in terms of job demand. Stefano, you can't build a career based on the vendor. I'll say that again. You can't build a career based on a vendor. So Stefano, 98% of enterprises use more than one cloud. 98%. 83% of enterprises, the work we're doing as cloud architects is taking stuff out of the cloud and rebuilding data centers. So we can put the high throughput, the high security, the things that are critical to us in our data centers, and we can use the cloud from where agility, speed to market, that kind of thing. So that's what we're doing. So you have to learn the cloud. What you're effectively asking is, do I learn how to drive a Toyota or do I learn how to drive a Mercedes? It doesn't matter. If all you know is one cloud, there's nothing we could actually use anyone for ever anyway, because everybody is multi-cloud. And here's the difference. I need you to know what is a virtual machine, for example, versus a container, versus application virtualization, versus function as a service. I need you to know how to choose the right one. I need you to know the architectural trade-offs and options. What does one do better than the other? I need to know how that's going to better impact the business after evaluating all trade-offs. Now, whether it's an AWS EC2 instance, a virtual machine in a VMware environment, a virtual machine in a Nutanix environment, an AWS EC2 instance, which is a virtual machine, a Google Compute Engine instance, which is a virtual machine, or Azure calls it an Azure virtual machine and Oracle calls it a virtual machine. That's just marketing vocabulary. I need you to know when to use the virtual machine versus when to use the container, when to use application virtualization, and more importantly, when not to. When to use a function as a service, and when is a function as a service not going to offer the right performance, maybe due to cold start latency, where maybe it's going to cost too much if it runs too much. So it's all about that. So in England, they need people that understand cloud. In Europe, they also understand cloud, and I didn't classify England as Europe. In the US, we need people that understand cloud, but I don't need anybody that only knows the name of us, that only knows vendor. Now, if I was looking for the implementation engineers, not the architects, I'd be more concerned about the person's hands-on ability to build it, an implementation engineer. But as an architect, I need you to be more important to know when to use AWS and when to use Azure, and why maybe you should split your load amongst both. And that way you've got better availability in case each cloud goes down. And better yet, maybe there's something that's really good from an analytics perspective on the Google Cloud that you might use, while you might use, say, Azure and AWS and have a data center for your high throughput things. I hope that helps. Come to the webinar tomorrow if you desire. Always love having full conversations on Zoom. Can I explain in an architect role in the physical architecture design? And what role may a solutions architect come when it comes to physical architecture? So, Tommy, if you mean the physical architecture of plugging stuff in, there is no physical architecture. So, I don't know what you mean by physical architecture. What I can tell you is we create an overall architecture. And what's part of an architecture package? Well, part of an architecture package is going to be all of the architectural artifacts along the way. So what that might be, we may have a business architecture as an architectural artifact, especially at the enterprise architect level. We may have a mapping of business value streams at the business architecture level. We may have a set of business processes that we have to document at the architecture level. We will have to create a stakeholder map of who are the key stakeholders and what do they do and what do they need to sign off at the business architecture level. At the same time, we might have a data architecture level, because if you look at the 4 domains of enterprise architecture, what you're dealing with is the business architecture, like I just described, the data architecture, the application architecture, and the technology architecture. So let's look at the data architecture. How does the organization use data? What is the organization's data lifecycle? How will that organization maintain privacy in that data? For example, do they tokenize it? Do they obfuscate it? Do they use nominalization or pseudonymization or something like that? That would definitely be part of the architecture. What type of encryption do we use? How do we encrypt it in movement? How do we encrypt it in DRAM and CPU if we need to with secure computing, what have you? So that would be, say, your data architecture. And then we have to map out the applications. What are the key applications that business needs? How does the business use that application? And then we have to map out the applications. And I bet you in the normal company, when you map out the applications, you're going to find hundreds of them. And in many cases, companies have 10 different applications. They're using 2% of each one. They're trying to support 20. They're paying licensing fees for 20, and one of those applications will do it all. And by minimizing those applications, we can create a simplicity and elegance that'll make it easier to create change in the future easily. And at the same time, we're going to decrease costs. And at the same time, we're decreasing operational complexity. Now, that's a big thing when it comes to troubleshooting from the operations team later. So now we have to get into the technology architecture. So we're going to map that out. First, what's it going to look like? Is it a hybrid multi-cloud? Most likely. And then we have to get into those environments. We get into the hybrid cloud. Now, ultimately, we're going to need various architectural views. For example, we may need architectural views of, say, the compute infrastructure at the compute layer, the actual device layer. You'll have layers, you'll have maps of what the network looks like, the physical network, the way it's actually wired, and the devices that are actually there, the cabling between them. You'll actually have architectures of the routing architecture. Okay, it's OSPF here, it's BGP here, there's a route aggregation point here. You'll probably have an architecture in that thing that's going to be for the AI architecture, and we're going to dive deep in each one of those. And then we're going to have one of those for the cloud, and then we're going to have one of those for the other clouds in the data centers until we've documented anything. It'll have the compute, it'll have the level of compute, the type of compute, the size of the compute, all of it. Same thing, it'll have all our security in there. Where's our firewalls? Where's our IDS, ICS systems? What kind of IAM systems are we using? What was the trade-off strategy? All that's going to be in there. So, when an engineer draws a little picture that looks like an AWS wish list that comes out of an AWS certification, that's not architecture. That's an engineering build. But architecture is going to explain everything, what the work's like today, how the work's going to be like tomorrow, who needs to do what, the level of skills the people need. So that's kind of the difference. Though it's really about that business. It's about what are those layers. And some of those layers are how the business works. Because if we don't know how it works, we can't prove to them that we can make sure that the new application doesn't negatively impact their sales rep. And we have to be able to do that if we know how to prove that we can make a difference in the organization. Hope that helps. If you want to come to the webinar, I'd love to talk about it deeper with you. Andy Sauer. Hi, Mike. Good to see you. Is business acumen about understanding how an organization makes money? That's part of it. But here's to let you think about it. So this is real business acumen. It's actually knowledge of business, all the forces of business, and how to run a business. So let me explain to you what I mean. If you're an architect with business acumen and you see that a new tariff is coming, you have to automatically say, if we're importing our goods, is that going to increase our cost of goods sold if we have to pay those tariffs? And if so, what do we need to do? Can we raise the price? Do we have the price elasticity to raise the price? And Andy, what I mean by price elasticity is some prices you can raise and people still buy it. And other times you raise the price and everybody says no. So we'd have to look at that organization's price elasticity and see, could we raise the price? Now, if we can't raise the price, how do we meet that? Do we automate certain things by removing costs of the system? So immediately when you see a regulation change, if you've got business acumen, you're already planning. Or an alternative, Andy, could be, well, if the product's made in this country and this country has tariffs, and we could modify our supply chain where this can go from one country to another country, we can import it there and therefore avoid the tariff. So the architect has to be able to see it. Now, the architect needs to say, okay, interest rates have dropped. Now, if interest rates have dropped, what's going to happen? Consumers are going to spend more money. People are going to borrow more money. They're going to spend money. Now, is that going to increase the actual sales that we have in our business? If so, how do we capitalize it? Will our technology systems support the needs? If not, what changes do we need to make now? So when this expected business increases 2 months from now, we'll be ready for it, or 6 months from now. Now, good business acumen looks at walking into a business and being able to try to buy the product, for example. And when you try to buy the product and you walk in the stores and it's easier to steal than it is actually to pay for it, you note that down, that there's some real security risks and challenges for that business. When you try to buy that product to experience what it's like potentially, and I do that sometimes as an architect, how do the salespeople treat you? Do they have the information they need, or do they not have the information? And if they don't have the information, what can you do in an architectural design to better arm those salespeople with the right information to be able to close more deals? Now, Andy, it's the same time you need to be able to look at that organization's cost of capital. And they could either issue more stock or they could borrow money, and you need to determine what that cost of capital is. And then, for example, you can build a business case. For example, let's say there's a $300,000 server from Dell that's got 384 cores, about 6 terabytes of DRAM, and about a 96 terabyte hard drive. It's about $350,000. Now, if you have the business acumen and that company has, say, a 7.5% cost of capital, you can look at that server and say, if I can afford to put it on my balance sheet, can the company take on more debt? Well, we can finance that server for approximately $100,000 a year. So we could pay basically 8,000 per month, 8,000 per month, like 8,200 a month or 8,400 a month or something like that. And that will be what it costs. Now that same server in the cloud might cost $100,000 a month. So we can then look at it and we can say, well, it's a lot cheaper to pay $8,000 in financing if the business can afford to take the debt on the balance sheet. But at the same time, if the business can't afford to take the debt on the balance sheet, well, then we could potentially lease it and turn that technology into an operating expense. And we might lower the payment for it because with a lease, we take the price new versus what the residual value is after that, and we finance that. But that would affect the company's the way they would actually affect their taxes, because if they buy it as a capital purchase, it's depreciation. But if they buy it as a lease, it's an operational expense, which is written off completely that year. So if you understand these kind of things, you're going to be able to help them. Now, when you walk in the business and you look at the business architecture and you see this glaring inefficiency, and you ask questions and say, I noticed that there's an extra couple of hops along the way. Is that necessary? Well, it's only necessary because our technology can't support it. If it could, we could get rid of that. Okay, let's move to the optimal business architecture and figure out the technology that's going to get there. So I hope that made sense, Andy. And again, I'd love to have more of a conversation, come into a webinar, come in anything, but to help explain that. But that's really the difference. So your whole value as an architect really doesn't hinge that much on technology at all. It's how you can help enhance that business. Now, what I'm describing is pure enterprise architecture. Now, a cloud architect like David Lithicum is doing that in his job, and he's doing enterprise architecture with his cloud architecture just like I am. When I do cloud architecture, I always start with the executives, because when I work with the executives and I get that information, then I know how to solve the problem. But until that CEO says, Mike, the measure of success on this is 7% increase in revenue, 22% increase in employee productivity. Andy, I have no idea what my architecture should even look like. And I have no idea what my technology should look like, or the processes of the care, or anything, until I know what that organization works. I hope that helps, but I'd love to have a deeper conversation with you. Feel free to join me at any time on an architecture webinar, or if you're one of our students, join us in class. These are great questions. Can I give you resources about executive presence? So, yes. One is in our program. We teach it. If you are not in our program, I can give you some resources. So I can tell you that Speakeasy in California, they'll have a couple of day classes on presentations. If you do 2 or 3 of them there, they'll start working on your executive presence. Now, it's about $10,000. Now, our course is much cheaper than that, but in that, they will definitely give you some. Now, Andy, what I did after attending that like a couple of times and then taking other courses on executive presence and other training, is I got an executive coach. And most executives at the executive level get executive coaches, because you may pay a couple of $100 a week to that executive coach to really groom you. And that's going to sound like a lot. Let's say you pay $200 a week for someone to speak to you for an hour to guide you. Let's just say you did that. So that's $10,000 a year. Now, if by doing that, your salary goes up $100,000 that year because you were seen as a bigger executive and moved into a bigger role, then it's very cheap. So you can actually tell the difference between how 2 sets of people spend their money. Generally speaking, not always, people of lower income tend to spend their money on stuff. Vacations, the new iWatch or Apple Watch, or whatever that stuff is. Generally speaking, the people that go the farthest in their lives, they tend not to buy stuff, but they tend to buy training, which is why you'll see people spend hundreds of $1,000s, or at least we used to, on an MBA. I don't know if it's worth it now, but at least it used to be. It's why I literally spent almost $40,000 on a CCI, as crazy as that sounded. I didn't have the money. I borrowed money from my brother. I borrowed money from my my father-in-law. I took a personal loan. I ran up my credit cards to do the CCI. And then I was able to pay it back in about 4 months. And then I had double the salary for my previous job. So it was worth it for the rest of my life. So that's what I would do, is I would get an executive coach. But I will tell you, it might be worth going out to Speakeasy for a couple of days. I did it. It was part of my training. I also got an executive coach, and I took a lot of training there. This is one of those things that works. But the coach can tell you how to stand, how to take up space, when to vary your vocal tone, when to pause, how to collect your thoughts, how not to say those kind of things. So those are your kind of things. It's the kind of thing you have to be taught. And what I love about architecture careers, truthfully, is they have a barrier to entry. There are some jobs that are easy to learn. Like you can teach yourself to code. You can teach yourself how to work on Linux. And quite frankly, you can teach yourself networking because you can read Jeff Doyle books, you can read RFCs, and you can learn. Now, what is the downside of something you could do on your own? Everybody does it. So now let's look at the things you can't do on your own, realistically speaking. Could you imagine someone taught themselves how to do surgery? No, seriously, would you go to that surgeon? They taught themselves. Of course not. Now, how about someone that wants to learn how to fly an airplane? Do you think they can figure out how to pick up a 747 or 777, take off, land, and not crash and burn? Of course not, unless they're a trained pilot. Now, the next thing is these kind of architecture things, medicine things, these kind of finesse things. Because someone literally needs to speak to you, hear exactly what you say, look at your actual body language when you say it, and then make a recommendation. What I liked about Speakeasy is they actually used actors to help increase your stage presence when you're on the stage. What I like about us is we teach the entire architecture career for less than 2 days at Speakeasy. And also work on these skills. And you'll see it if you're one of our students. We're going to be doing a new architecture project starting next week. And when those architecture presentations come in, and when those students start asking the requirements questions and gathering information, and gathering stakeholders, you'll see their executive presence come out, and we'll coach that along the way too. Hope that helps. But those are two good resources for executive presence: a good executive coach and Speakeasy. What skills are you going to focus on in an AI architect role? How much of it is technical? Sounds like the kind of role where you can't bullshit your way around. So you can't bullshit your way around. David and I have spoken. David says, 99% of the people that walk in an architecture interview can't hire. I said, I think it's a little higher, David, than 99. I think it's like 99.5. He and I are good friends. We're peers, and we see eye to eye on architecture things. You can't fake your way through this. And the reason is, if I had a security architect, and all my security architects can do this. If I said to the security architect something so basic, could you tell me what exists in the IP header of an IP packet? And then could you tell me, based upon the information in that IP header, the things that you can do about it? That's a technical architecture question. Now, what am I trying to assess? Well, first, if that person doesn't understand the fundamentals of networking, they can't secure anything. And then the second thing I'm trying to assess is how holistic their knowledge is. So if I say, could you tell me what's in the header of an IP packet, and how I could use that information to secure the environment? Well, that tells me a lot. So first, if the person doesn't know networking, they won't be able to say, well, in an IP header, you have a source address, a destination address, a protocol, your port numbers, and you also have a type of service bit. And it checks them to make sure nothing's broken. For the most part, that's what's in there. And then they say to me, well, Mike, with that information, we can configure an access list on a router and the cloud provider. With that information, we can configure firewalls. I say, okay, they know a little bit about networking. Maybe they were a network engineer. But they still, and then if they say, now, Mike, we could do that. Also on the network, we could use that type of service bit to drop the traffic or prioritize the traffic or mitigate the appearance of a worm by making sure that critical traffic gets through, and we can deprioritize this traffic. Now, not only that, our intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems also look at the IP headers, and they look at the way these IP packets are formed coming in. Now, when we look at a DDoS attack where we're getting TCP half opens, the content delivery network can actually look at the packet and see what's going on and see the things in the packet to determine if they should just drop the packet as well. Now, when we start getting into our logs and automated response things, we can start to see the source address, the destination address of the problematic people. And with that information, if it's an employee, we can remediate that employee, fire that employee, discipline that employee, or if it's someone else, we can act upon it. Now, as it turns out, if you want to log in, and if you're normally in Florida and all of a sudden, instead of being in Florida, you're in Athens, Greece, I might want my IAM system to look at the header of your message coming in that says, yep, is not in Florida, he's Athens. And I might want to actually give you an additional challenge based upon your location or the device you're in and my context to where IAM systems are. So I expect an answer like that. And when I get that, I know that person understands how all the pieces and parts are actually tied together. I often ask someone, could you tell me how an organization's based on an organization's weighted average cost of capital, could you determine whether you would build a private cloud or a public cloud? Again, a simple thing to see if the person understands finance. And it becomes very clear, either they do or they don't. Now, I can ask someone, and this is the difference between an engineer and an architect all day. I could say, I have a bank that gets 20 million hits per day on its website. Now, not only getting 20 million hits a day, it's got 300 million citizens' personal information on file. If this website goes down, $10 million will be lost per minute. What goes into the design of that DMZ to make it happen? And you'll notice it instantly. If the person doesn't know what a DMZ is, then you really have to worry about it. If the person says, I know, just use AWS WAF and Shield and all that stuff, I took a solutions architect exam, they have no idea how to design a demilitarized zone. And then if they say, wow, that many citizens' data, that much this, and then they ask you the question, I actually already told them the answer, and then they said, well, you know what we could do? Because you're in this kind of critical situation, you need some serious hardening protection. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into some serious layers of next generation firewalls. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a network load balancer that's going to front end two next generation firewalls. We've chosen Palo Alto because we like their behavior anomaly as our primary firewalls. But everything is fallible. So behind those two Palo Alto firewalls, we're going to have another load balancer. We're going to use two Cisco firewalls because the algorithm on the Cisco firewalls is different than the Palo Alto. And maybe if the Palo Alto misses something, maybe the Cisco can't catch it or vice versa. Now, this is really critical. So we really need a lot of monitoring on this traffic. So if I stick another network load balancer in front of some IDS IPS systems, we have a lot of information and logging we've collected to our firewalls, and we can send those to our SIEM systems, which have AI auto remedying with our source systems. And we want to be able to catch those logs and do it. And then if the person says, well, the next thing we really think about is a load balancer. And can we put a web application firewall in that load balancer protect against web specific endpoints like SQL injections? And then they say on that load balancer, we're going to come up with some way to firewall it off. And then let's talk about the hosts that are behind it. So the hosts themselves will need to be hardened, which means when we need to remove unnecessary packages, maybe we need to put some endpoint detection and response software on there. And we might need to do that. And themselves, we're going to need a very strong customer identity and access management strategy that's going to enable the customers to change this, change that, do that on their own. And otherwise, and they can start talking and walking you through what they're doing and the thinking or logic, you can hire them. Now, that's why I can hire people with no experience all the time. Because the person that can answer it like that and explain to me why, I'm like, whoa, you know how to do this. But the person that's had 25 years experience, they can't explain that to me. I know they can't do the job because that's the job. Explain technology all day long. So when you think of that, let's now talk about the skills you would focus on for an AI architect role. Now, if we really think about it, I want you to remember the majority of this job is non-technical. You're not going to be allowed to touch the technology. So this is not an engineering job. And when you understand that this is not an engineering job, let's now look at it a little more holistically. And let's look at the things that you actually would need as an AI architect. So the majority of what you're going to need, and this is both David Lithicum and I that put this list together, is going to be the following. You're going to have good sales skills. Because if you can't convince the client to adopt your solution as an AI architect, the project dies. Now, as an AI architect, you're going to have to interface with the executives. And you're going to have to translate and strategize between what people are saying at the strategy level into some actionable design that you can help design with the technology team. Now, that's going to take really serious communication skills. Get the information wrong, poor communication, the entire architecture falls apart. So huge amount of communication skills. And that's typically the biggest skill we look for as managers when we hire. Now, the next part of the job is presentation skills. In fact, I promise you, if you're going to get an AI architect job, do you know what the last interview will be? You'll have to give a presentation to a panel of people. And by doing so, they will be able to determine if you can give that type of C-suite presentation, which is going to be required for the job. So when we get past that, I need you to understand you have to know how to write for executives. You're going to have to write briefs for executives to convince them to spend $1 billion or more in a couple of pages. So that's going to be a level of executive writing skills. Now, what I need you to understand is architecture is a team sport. You're going to be constantly leading people. You're going to have to lead the client. You're going to have to lead the people on your team. So you're going to have strong leadership skills. Now, the next thing you will need to have is CXO relevancy. You need to be able to walk in the room with the CEO, CSO, CISO, CTO, COO, what have you, and be able to advise them and speak in their language. So that when you're talking to the chief operating officer, you're talking about how those optimized business processes are going to enhance productivity, for example. And when you're speaking to that chief financial officer, you're showing how that the money they invest in your project, you're going to show them a rate of return which is greater than their actual costs. Because if you can't, they're not going to invest money in your architecture. So, that's the CXO relevancy that you need. Now, you need executive presence. Now, before executive presence, I was like this. Hi, everybody. Let's talk about BGP. BGP is a path vector routing protocol that uses TCP port 179. So it took a lot for me to come across as an executive, walk in and command the room. So there's a lot for that. Now, the next thing I need you to understand is your job is to enhance business. So if you don't understand business, you cannot do the job as an architect. And McKinsey estimated that 70% of all architecture failures was related to poor business acumen and the people designing the solution. So you have to be able to have the business acumen to do it. Now you will have to know, that means knowing how to build the business case, knowing how to do all of it. Now that's 75% of the job, or at least 60% of the job as the AI architect. So the rest of it is really general knowledge, meaning you have to know the data center and the cloud, which basically means you have to know the data center, because all the cloud is just a virtual data center. So that means you need to understand compute, storage, for example, security, everything. So generally speaking, the underlying infrastructure. You need to understand networking to a degree, because you're going to need a network to set up your AI. And if the networking doesn't work or doesn't provide the performance, your AI is gone. Now you're going to have to design a workload hosting systems. Maybe you need 1,000 GPUs or 100,000 GPUs for what you're using. Maybe the model could be done on a CPU instead, based upon what it is. Maybe the AI model can be done on a fully programmable ASIC or an ASIC. So at that point, you're going to have to design the technology strategy under that, on the cloud, off the cloud, what have you. Now, in many cases, we're designing data centers as architects. You may have some data center design skills that you need to understand along the way. You will have to understand security, not to the level of a security architect, but you have to understand, protecting the AI system. For example, what happens if the knowledge base behind it or the training data gets corrupted? The AI system will do bad things very fast. You'll have to have a lot of knowledge on governance, compliance, and ethics, especially ethics here. And if you're with us, we're going to teach them all. But you're also going to have focused expertise. You're going to have real deep knowledge, not how to build them, but on databases and training data. And that means data hygiene and the types of, and how to clean the data, map the data, reduce the data, load data into different places. You'll have to have strong knowledge of inference engines and strong knowledge on how to build, or at least how we would create an AI model of our own, and how we would tune the AI models that we're using, and how we would test the models, and of course, what goes into AI operations, the people behind the scenes that are going to be there. So if this sounded mostly like executive skills, there's a good reason. It's not a very technical role. It's 3/4 business or 70% business or 60 at the most technical. And the rest of it is design strategy. So kind of hope that helps. I hope that gives you a real answer of exactly what you're trying to talk about. But no, you can't fake your way through these kinds of things. And that's all I can determine instantly whether someone can do the job or someone cannot do the job. It's that quick. Great question. You know what? If anybody has questions, I have to leave shortly. So if anybody has any questions, why don't you ask them right now? Otherwise, I will catch up to you another day or hopefully in the architecture webinar. So if you have some questions, get them in. Chris, let's bring in the next one. How to transition from a full stack developer to an architect. You have completed the AWS Solutions Architect certification. Will that help you become an architect? So I'd like to invite you to our architecture webinar tomorrow. While it is on an enterprise architecture, if you want to be a cloud architect or a solutions architect, I will happily guide you there. So the key to think when you look at the AWS Solutions Architect, let's say professional, what it is it's a systems administration project. So it's the name of something and how to configure that. Do you know what you don't do as architect? You can't use those silly names with your clients because they'd laugh you out of the room because they're AWS marketing names. And quite frankly, you're not allowed to configure anything. So in order to go from an engineer to architect, and I've taken hundreds of them, people like Pritipal, who went from a software developer for 20 years and straight into an enterprise architect role. Or someone like Lohit, for example, that was a software developer that took our training that's now working at AWS as an application architect. You always have to look at the job and you always have to look at the skills. There is almost, so when we look at the domains that you would need to know as an architect, I'll give you the business domains and I'll give you the technical domains. Now, on all those soft skills I just mentioned for the AI architect and all those business skills, well, you have to have them first. Without them, you won't be hired, which is typically speaking. And I'm also going to tell you, Arvinda Mehta, that in 60% of the cases when someone goes on an architecture interview and they talk about their engineering, the interview dies right there because we're not looking for engineers. So generally speaking, we'd have to start you and train you to be an architect. I can give you an example like Jazz, who was a cloud engineer for a decade. We trained him. It took him about a year to become an architect. But at the same time, I'm going to tell you that a sales rep like Wallace, we trained and got hired in about 6 months as an enterprise architect, half the time the engineer. Harsha, cloud engineer for 12 years? It took us 14 months to get him his first cloud architect job because he had to forget all the engineering and start to focus on architecture. Now, sales reps, generally the easiest to train because they have at least 50% of the skills already. So you have to learn, in your case, you have to learn the network and the data center. And what do I mean by that? So from a compute perspective, you'll have to understand your compute options, like a virtual machine, a container, function as a service, or application virtualization. You will not need to know how to build them, but you will need to know how to choose them. For example, how many cores does my server need? How much DRAM should my server need? How do I size the server? How do I harden the operating system on the server? What's going to go into that? That's all on you as an architect. And then when it comes to storage, you'll need to understand block storage, object storage, file storage. Now, it's not going to be like an AWS certification where they make you think block storage is fast. You're going to go from the data center where you could have 13, 14, 15 million IOPS per second, and going to go to the cloud, we've got a few thousand or 100,000 IOPS per second. So now you've got some storage latency problems to make up with on the cloud. And how are you going to deal with it? Or are you going to use some type of a storage gateway, like NetApp has? And what are the strengths and weaknesses of that approach? Or are you going to use RAID 10? And if you RAID 10, what is the cost of those additional drives? Where would you not use block storage? Where would you use file storage? So then you would need to know security. And by security, I mean IAM and the types of IAM and the strengths and weaknesses of each type of IAM and where you would use them. Network security, application security, data center security, all of it. And then when you're done with that, you would need to understand the businesses that actually drive transformation. And those are kind of your technical things. And you would need to understand networking and BGP and routing. So it's all going to be things that are completely different than what you did as a software engineer, but that's okay. We can all learn them. It's the greatest thing. We're born with no instincts. But remember, in that job, you're going to have to sell, and you're going to have to be good at it. In that job as a cloud architect, for example, you're going to have to lead an architecture team of 15 to 15 people. In that job as a cloud architect, you're going to have to build me a business case that proves to me my $500 million spending is going to yield business results. In that architecture job, you're going to have to, literally speaking, present to the C-suite and the board of directors. So why don't you come to our webinar tomorrow and we'll teach you exactly the steps. You're going to have to go to a set of training. Because what you've been part of your whole life is building, and I love engineers. They are awesome. They build stuff. They bring architecture to life. But that's effectively like the nurse that's been working at the hospital that now wants to be a physician. You have all kinds of valuable experience, and we'll come back and we'll use it later. But you have a completely new set of skills to learn. So that's how we actually get you there. So ideally, come to that webinar tomorrow, and we'll go over the role, and I can answer any questions. And if you'd like, I can actually assess you, and I can assess your business acumen, and I can assess your architecture skills. And if not, I'll recommend what you need to do to learn it. How to practice leadership if you're not a manager or team leader. You're going to have to get some leadership training. Now, the best way I can describe this, Andy, is many years ago, I learned martial arts. And I remember my first martial arts instructor says, martial arts no in dojo, martial arts your life. And he didn't realize what he meant by that. And years later, martial arts affected the way I thought about the world. They enabled me to stay calm under incredibly challenging circumstances. They enabled me to go into places that no one else would ever be willing to go to deliver care for someone that needed it in a place. And every movement I make, as I actually think about it, well, that's just a martial arts movement. I didn't even realize I did this when I went there, and it's all been martial arts. It's been my entire life. So live it. So you need to go in there, you need to get some leadership training, and then you need to lead. You don't need to be the manager to lead. I wasn't the manager at WorldCom on my first job. I was hired as a network engineer for it. Was the highest level they could hire a network engineer. I didn't realize it. Within 3 weeks, I was being brought in. Mike, could you help out this person? Could you help out this person? This person's struggling. Could you help them? So I went in there, put my leadership shoes on, my leadership clothes on, so to speak, my mental leadership. And I said, Malesh, today let's talk. I see you're working with this. Want to learn a little more? And of course, Malesh said, yeah, I'd love to work with you. And then Nikhil would be the next person that I spoke to. And Nikhil, you want a little help on this? And yeah. And Jason, want a little help on this? Absolutely. Omar, do you want a little help on this? Yeah. Within a couple of weeks, everybody came to me for everything. And when they made me the lead architect 2 months later, it made sense. So you can always be a leader. How you act is a leader. Are people following you? If they're a leader, people wait to listen to everything that you do. If they do, you're a leader. If not, then I'd start looking at your leadership skills first. Do you have the presence? Are you communicating effectively? Do you have the right touch, the right time? And do you have the right leadership style at the time? For example, I first learned command and control leadership. And let me tell you when that's great. If there's a school bus accident versus a car, and I need to determine, and I've got paramedics and police officers coming into assistance, and I need to say, you need to take this patient to the hospital right now. You, by comparison, need to do this. You need to do this. You start CPR right now. You start an IV. That's command and control. Now, if I've got an RFP with a deadline of 24 hours from now, I know I might need to use that, or at least have a project manager that's going to use that. Now, long-term, I can't do that. It's entirely toxic. So what would I do long-term? Long-term, I might choose a more appropriate style of leadership, like a servant style of leader. For where I typically go is somewhere between that and affiliative. That's where I feel best. So, but the key is you have to be able to change your leadership at the time. People will see you immediately as a leader if you are. I look at my brother-in-law. He's just a natural leader. I walk in a room and everybody's running right over to him to ask it for help and ask him to talk to him and just to be around him. He's just that. So learn something and act that way your entire life. And when I remember a lot of my students were saying, my kids are now starting to listen better to me. I'm not having arguments with my spouse like I used to be. So practice your leadership skills in everything you do. Look at things from the perspective of the other person. How would you feel there? Look at what you can do to add value to the other person. Figure out how you can remove roadblocks for somebody else. Guess what? You're actually a leader, and you've already moved into the role and you didn't know it, and next thing you realize you're getting promoted. But that's what I would do. But you can't teach yourself leadership. You've got to have somebody work with you on it. Curiosity here. You're just starting your career in tech after your bachelor's. What do you need to do to kickstart your career properly, being unable to pay a mentor? So the first thing that you need to do is actually develop the right skills. And generally speaking, coming out of school, you may or may not have them. So, Christian, what would you like to do? And I'd actually recommend you come to our webinar tomorrow, but I'd like to know what you would want to do. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of great options that you could do. You could become a security architect. You could become an enterprise architect. You could decide to be a network engineer or a network architect. You could decide to be an offensive security engineer. It doesn't matter what you pick. There's opportunities. But what you have to have is a very specific set of skills for each job. And the biggest issue we find in tech is people don't know. What they know is how to build something. What they do is know how to code. And unfortunately, most of those are not real world skills. Because AI is doing the coding at the bottom level at this point. It's already replaced, in most cases, the bottom 20, 30% of the engineers that are there. Look at what Salesforce did. They kept their salespeople, they kept their architects, they kept all the strategists, and they just replaced a lot of back-end workers. IBM's going to do the same thing. So you're currently a support engineer for Microsoft. Oh, you're in a great shape. You're in great shape. If you're working as a support engineer in Microsoft, ask them to help send you to training. They'll do it. They'll send you wherever you want to go. That's what I would do. I'd get them to pay to send you to some training. And in that case, I would say, where do you want to go? Do you want to move into a solutions architect role? If so, that's one plan. If you want to move into a deeper role, that's another plan. But what do you want to do? And congratulations to already be working at Microsoft. Microsoft hires the best of the best. So that's already great. But what would you like to do? If you can tell me what you would like to do, then we know your ultimate target. Then we can actually architect the plan. Well, while we're at that, oh, Mr. Businessman, thanks for everything, Mike. I'm so happy to see you. How's your security role going? I hope it's going as good as I think it is. I'm so proud and so of how far you've come. And I hope to get to see you someday soon. Next time I go to Atlanta, I have to call you. And if you just want to pop into class, even though I know you're working, I'd love to see you there anyway. So wonderful seeing you here. And Miki, you're happy to be here for the first time. I am thrilled that you are here. I am thrilled. Please keep coming back. To the prayer, thanks, Mike. Thank you. I think the Toyotas are the best cars. My wife has one. I think it just drives and drives and drives. I think she put like 200,000 miles on it the last few years, driving back and forth to gymnastics classes. We actually addressed this one, Chris. But the good news is Christian actually popped his response in. Well, there were other jobs there, ones I didn't see. You find yourself very technical. You just need guidance on what the market wants. So, two things. One is I think you're very wise thinking about not what the market wants per se, but what the demand is. But I also think you should think about jobs of the future. And let me explain what I mean by that. I hate saying this, but it's true. And I hate saying this because I wish it wasn't true. But a couple of years ago, Christian, we had a cloud engineering program, and it was a great program. And Chris and I made the decision after looking at the world and where the world was going to stop it and not train people for engineering positions. And as much as we both love engineers, because we love those hands-on people, what are we really dealing with? We're dealing with a world where an infrastructure as code script, which could be written by an AI and tuned by a DevOps engineer, can literally do the work of 100 cloud admins in about 3 minutes. So we start looking at those junior level jobs. They're either done by extremely good professionals or they're done by AI. So if we look at the future, we have to look at what AI can do and we have to look at what AI cannot do, but we still need to know your goal. AI can code, AI can configure, and in about 2 years, 3 years time, AI will probably be able to do tier 1 tech support and tier 2 tech support. Now, it won't do tier 3 because those folks are really good solving problems. And what you might see is get rid of tier 1 and get rid of tier 2 and hire twice as many or 3 times as many tier 3 people. AI can either resolve it or not in the first 3 minutes. And if AI can't resolve it in the first 3 minutes, which would be basically your tier 1, tier 2, it goes straight to someone that's so good that they're going to satisfy that customer there, all for lower cost. So think about that. Now look at what AI cannot do. AI cannot evaluate trade-offs. AI cannot act in limited information like an expert can't do. AI cannot convince a billionaire CEO to invest $1 billion in your technology plan. AI cannot lead a team. AI can, realistically speaking, not do anything other than stuff that can be automated. And if we start looking at the jobs of the future and the skills of the future, which I'm going to show you in a minute, according to the World Economic Forum, where I want you to get to the point is, these are the things that no one can do. Let me share this with you because I truly think it'll be helpful for you to see, because I love where your brain is going. And I love the way you're thinking. You're going to go extremely far with this kind of thinking pattern. So let me see if I've opened this up. So let me share this. Just share screen, window. Okay, here we go. Chris, if you can share that. So, okay, so if you actually look at what I wanted to show you here, so what we're looking at now is the World Economic Forum's recent report on core skills and the future skills for 2030. Now, here's what I want you to look at: the skills that are dying that we don't need. And these are things like programming, because the tech will be able to do some of it in the future. A lot of the social media blogging type stuff. Quite frankly, people like me that speak multiple languages, the value of that is going down as AI can translate. Manual dexterity, all this stuff is going away because AI can do it. And then look at the job skills of the future. AI and big data. Well, there's not a single architect out there, AI architect, cloud architect, enterprise architect, or any architect for that matter. Chris, is the data still shared? If not, bear with me. I'll find it. I'm going to reshow this. Hold on. Bear with me. Somehow Okay, so now let's go back to this. So now look at the skills of the future. AI and big data. Every enterprise architect, cloud architect, every one of us is working with this. Technological literacy. Yeah, you can't be an architect without knowing the technology and knowing what you're designing. Creative thinking. I promise you, as an architect, you're going to be creatively thinking every minute to solve some kind of business or technical problem. Talent management. Oh, that's another one. We're going to lead an architecture team. Systems thinking. What is the impact of one thing to the system on another part of the system? That's half of what we do as architects. Curiosity and lifelong learning. I promise you, as an architect, you'll be doing this. Leadership and influence. What we do is we lead large teams, and we have to influence executives to spend money and follow our architectural guidance. Analytical thinking, the ability to evaluate trade-offs, to use this option versus this option, make decisions and recommendations with incomplete information. So all of these skills are the skills that can't be replaced by AI. So now I'll come back and let's talk about what that means. The jobs that can't be replaced by AI are the cloud architect, the enterprise architect, the security architect, and any other architecture role. The sales reps cannot be replaced by AI. The senior people leadership cannot be replaced by AI. The strategist cannot be replaced by AI. The ethicist can't be replaced by AI. Now, what the hands-on people can, but the strategists, the thinkers, the planners cannot. Now, the sales engineer also is safe because they're actually creating a solution and selling it just like a solutions architect would be. But these are those kind of things that you really, really have to think about. And those are the jobs of the future. Now, for those people that want to stay technical in engineering, there still is options. And let me talk about the difference of the people that will be successful and the people that will be not. So I like to say, and it's kind of a joke, but for me, it was my intro to networking, that the Cisco Certified Internet Expert is intro level networking. And why is that? Because that's the bare minimum knowledge I need someone to have, whether they pass the certification or not, but that level, to be able to say, well, you know what, we have these two options. This option has these strengths and these weaknesses. This option has these benefits and these weaknesses. We're going to choose this option. Okay, if we do this, add this change to the system, that will cause an impact or ripple effect through the system that we can't handle. Therefore, we can't make this change. Those set of skills, those principal engineer and distinguished engineer people are also not replaceable. So when it comes to who gets replaced, it's the how-to people. Now, when it comes to the biggest salaries, it's your business acumen, your leadership, which are jobs like the enterprise architect, cloud architect, security architect, AI architect, VP, SVP, CIO, CTO, CISO, solutions architect, global account manager. They're paid very well as well. And those are your jobs of the future, realistically speaking. Hope that helps. But if you want to come to the webinar tomorrow, I'll be more than happy to meet you, talk to you, ask you questions, see what you love, and then help guide you towards a particular path if you would desire. And I'm happy to completely do it. It's completely free tomorrow if you want to join me. Can someone jump from engineering to CIO role or CTO directly, or some experience in enterprise architecture? So Andy Nafuli was recently a student of mine, and he got his first tech job ever in his life as a chief technology officer. He's in Manchester, United Kingdom. Now, the best chief technology officer I ever worked with before I came to Cisco was when I was on Wall Street. And that person did not have a technology background at all, but they were a Wall Street business executive. And they understood that technology was a competitive advantage. So what they did is they built the coolest enterprise architecture team in the world. And then we made all the recommendations, and that executive would say, yes. And that executive had so much clout that he could say to the CEO, Mike's project needs 50 million. And the CEO would say, is the business case work out? And the chief technology officer said, I made him show me the money. And it was done. It was like that. So it all depends on how good of a leader you are. Now, Andy, 50% of enterprise architects don't come from a tech background. I'm going to say it again. One of the highest paying architecture roles with the most potential, most people don't come from a tech background that actually get it. So there is that. Now, what I want a C-suite person going straight to the chief technology officer, it depends. Now, for example, let's say I had a business architect from McKinsey. And that business architect had been consulting on a large number of digital transformation projects. And that business architect was designing key business processes, but he also brought in a lot of architects and had a lot of conversation with IT architects instead of the business architects along the way. That person might actually already have CTO skills. Why? Because they probably needed an MBA to get that job at McKinsey. McKinsey spent 6 months telling people how to dress, how to walk, what you can wear, what you can say, how you can say it, how you ask a client questions, which is really the architecture training that because they assume out of business school, you're still going to need some. So they put literally $100,000 of training into you. McKinsey does, Accenture, Deloitte, they typically do the same thing. And then they do that with you for 6 months. And then you spent 10 years business consulting and you worked with some techies along the way. Now you're a prime candidate for a chief technology officer and you never worked in tech before. And you've never been an enterprise architect. But generally speaking, enterprise architect plus extra business acumen plus executive skills is how you go to the CIO way. Because remember, when we deal with the CIO is 100% executive, and they're responsible for two things. One is the strategy that the organization has to gain competitive advantage from technology, which comes from we architects. The other thing that chief information officer is focused on leading the entire operations. So let's say you're a company like JP Morgan Chase Bank, who may have 10,000 technology professionals working there, or 15 or 20,000 or more. They have 2,000 just AI people, and that was several years ago. Imagine where they're at now. So I kind of hope that helps. But yeah, you can move from an enterprise architect role to a chief technology officer role, but I wouldn't assume anybody would jump from engineering into any of these roles because these are not technical roles. And that's the thing to remember. Executive roles are technical roles. So I might need you as a CTO to be able to get $1 billion from the board. I don't care if you can code. Now, at the same time, I do care. Can you manage the vendors and negotiate the vendors' contracts? But I don't care if you can configure a virtual machine on AWS. Now, as a CTO, I need you to speak to the press constantly. And do you have the media training to speak to the press, to know what to say to the press or not say to the press? Again, I don't care what you can code. So generally speaking, engineering has nothing to do with any of these higher level roles. So what people do is they typically do what I did is, let's say you were in engineering, there's a transition. At some point, you have to convince people you're not an engineer and you're a business executive, which is about changing the way you walk, getting the training, getting the education, being able to actually do the job and being seen in it. Now that takes a very long time. So anybody can get one of these jobs, but I wouldn't expect you to get an architect job by working as an engineer for the last 30 years without spending as much time training as if you were a high school teacher, because they're very different jobs. So generally speaking, I wouldn't be looking for an engineer in a CTO role. I don't want somebody that's going to think about touching the tech. I want a business strategist. And I'm not going to pay $800,000 a year to somebody that can do stuff. I want someone that can help me be more successful and succeed. So as much as I love engineers, you don't promote engineers to the most senior leadership because they're good at engineering. Now, Andy, let's talk about the difference. Let's say that you were an engineer back in 1999, and then you spent the next let's say we're now an engineer until 2005. And then from 2005 to 2010, you were a manager engineering. And then from 2010 to 2013, you were senior manager of engineering. And then from 2013 to 2015, you were director of engineering. And then in the next 2 years, you moved into a senior director, you moved into a VP and an SVP. That's your track from engineering to a CIO role. Whereas if you're an enterprise architect and you've got all the business acumen, you're already there. Hope that helps. It's not the experience in somebody else's job. Alan, good to see you. How do I feel about getting a cloud architect or solutions architect job while waiting for the AI market to catch up? You think it's currently underdeveloped? Well, in your case, Alan, and I know you, if you got a cloud architect job, great. If you got a solutions architect, great. If you wanted to get an AI architect job, great. Doesn't matter. It's definitely not underdeveloped in the world of AI architecture, but you pick the one that you know best or that you like best or that you want to present yourself best. But any of them are going to be good, Alan. You are really, really smart. You are incredibly hardworking, and I know the challenges that you've had, and look how far you already are right now. So I feel like whatever first job they gave you, Alan, whether it was a solutions architect, whether it was a cloud architect, I don't even care. What's going to go in is they're going to meet you, and they're going to see who is this person, and they're going to see your competency. But more important, they're going to see that energy, enthusiasm, and passion. That. And they're also, especially if you tell your story, right, which we talked about, they're going to see that work ethic that you have that is literally speaking the top 10th of 1% of the people's work ethic that's out there. That's what I want to show them. And after that, I don't think it matters which one you actually go for, realistically speaking. Now, I will tell you the recruiter networks are a bit more sophisticated on every other architect kind than AI. But when it comes to the actual managers, they mostly know what they're actually looking for. But I think you could do fine in any of these. Alan, I know you know cloud architecture. I know it. I've seen it. I've seen it. So If you got a cloud architect role or solutions architect role, great. And if you got that, and then you wanted to focus on AI, and you got that until you moved into an AI architect role, that'd be great too. But I would just take the first one I can get, because I think you could take any of these roles. Wondering how we work without concerning yourself with office politics. You actually left your last IT ops role because you didn't know how to play it. Amika, we have to teach you how to play it. There is no job where you want to have any degree of power where you don't have to play politics. Now, there are certain ways to play it that are safer than others, and certain things that you can do along the way. But you have to. You have to play the game. And there are certain things that I won't do. Like, I won't go down a negative path about anything or anyone ever. It's just not something I do. And I'm not going to try to hurt one person, gossip. I don't play those games. It's just not part of what I do. But I do always in every architecture find the chief sponsor. And that's usually the CEO. And when I find who that after the CEO, I ask who are your key stakeholders, and I map them out. And I ask questions to those stakeholders, and I say, who are the other people that I should speak with along the way? And then I listen to that. And I go in there politely, and Amika, along the way, I know that somebody's probably had a bad day and is a little cranky. So I use my emotional intelligence and empathy to try to see things their way, to see how I would feel if I was them. Would I feel the same way? And the answer is usually yes. And how I would communicate that back to them, I would definitely do. Now, how I could walk into a room and there be like two people arguing and I need the right information from both. Do I have the ability to walk in and diffuse the situation? The answer is yes, and you do need that soft touch. Now, playing games with chit-chatting about this one or that one or this company's bad thing or this company's bad thing, I would never do that. And the reason I would never do that is two things. You know, my father-in-law, and I really miss him. He was really wonderful. And my mother-in-law, they said something to me when I was a kid, and it was really amazing. And they said, never say something that you wouldn't want the person to hear if they heard it. My father-in-law, Nicholas, incredible man. Sorry, I don't want to think about it. It obsessed me because he was just so great. But, think about that. So don't put in writing, don't say something that would offend someone. And I think you'll be all right. But come tomorrow, come to this free webinar if you can. And we'll really get into it deeply. And you can ask me questions live there, but you do have to figure out how to play politics. You do have to figure out how to be a leader. You do have to figure out how to take charge. You do have to learn when you walk in and the company just made a massive error and the CIO was fired because of it, which basically happens all the time. How you walk in there, emotionally intelligent, get all kinds of information to get exactly what you need to do. And we'll teach you how to play it. You definitely need to learn how to play it. Great question, Amika. I'm sorry, Ikama. I know a lot of Amikas, and I must have saw it and got your name wrong. I'm so sorry. To become a solutions architect, cloud certs are required. No, the skills to be an architect are required. With our training as a banner, what is our acumen time frame to get certified? So, Dino, my focus is not to get you certified. My focus is to get you hired. Passing a certification, Dino, is nothing. I'm literally not joking. I could send you to the websites where you would have an AWS Solutions Architect Professional within 3 days, a TOGAF 10 with another 3 days, and a CISSP a week later. Now, what will happen at the end of that? Nothing, because you won't have any architecture skills whatsoever. So there's five phases to our proven Go Cloud careers methods, and I'm going to tell you what those phases are. Phase 1. Training you to be the best of the best for your career, the top 25% of the people that are working there. Because when you are the best of the best, no one cares at all about your experience. And how do we make you the best of the best? Well, we have people like me and David Lithicum teach you the things that no one else has even ever seen at a huge scale, because we're that top 5% architect. And by that way, we can make you top 25%. That's phase 1 of our training. You have to have every skill, the business skills, the executive skills, the leadership skills, the sales skills, the presentation skills, and of course, your architect skills. Now, after that's phase 1 of us, which is making sure you can do the job, then we do phase 2. What if I told you, Dino 909, that literally speaking, 89% of the people don't get hired because of lack of soft skills? 89%. That's the statistics out there, which means 9 out of 10 people fail the interview because of lack of soft skills. So after we make you the top 25%, then we polish up your soft skills and polish up everything that a hiring manager would want about you. Because if you're not what they want, it doesn't matter how good your skills are, you're still not getting hired. Then there's phase 3, Dino. Now, phase 3 is being an architect. The students in my architecture program next week are going to be designing their next architecture, which means they will have an architecture portfolio filled with real-world architecture artifacts to prove to the world they're doing the job. So they'll have RFP responses, they'll have various architectures, they'll have various architecture artifacts, what have you. Phase 1, be great. Phase 2, be what the hiring manager wants. Phase 3, do the job and prove it to the world you can do it. Now, Dino, you're hireable at this point. You could be like Jeffrey W., who was a student of ours, who was hired with nothing more than a cloud practitioner. Or you could be like Delroy Batt, who was our student, who was hired by CDW as a cloud security architect with 0 certifications. You could be like Robert Welch, who was our student, who had a great job, but he didn't have any certifications. He had skills. So phase 1 is about being great. Phase 2 is about being what the hiring manager wants. And phase 3 is about skills. I can hire you at that point. Now, the reality is, if I don't know that you're good, then we need to focus on your credentialing. So at that point, that's when we do your credentials. That's when, if you were going to be a cloud solutions architect, we would do the AWS solutions architect professional, the TOGAF 10, and the, say, the CISSP is your baseline security. Why do we do those certifications? Because that's going to make people give you interviews. The previous 3 phases were based upon getting you hired. Now, in the same phase, Dino, what do? We also will help you work on your resume, because 99% of their resumes that come for architects are wrong. So we reject them. So they'll teach you how to make a real resume. Then we'll teach you how to create the real kind of LinkedIn profile, to create the real kind of content to get people to come to you. And then after that, we're going to prepare you for the interview to make sure you get hired. So let's talk about that. So time to get hired as a solutions architect for the average student, typically speaking, about 8 to 12 months if they can put in 20 hours a week. But it's also going to be dependent upon the time they learn. I mean, truthfully speaking, if you were able to spend 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, you'd probably get there in about 8 months. There's 1,000 hours of training in our program. Most people are hired before they complete our entire program, but we are extra thorough because we want to make sure you're so good there's not an employer out there that wouldn't want you. So that's our focus. But 8 to 12 months is typical. But Dina, when people train with us, they stay in our training programs until the day they're hired. We're not a boot camp. We're the anti-boot camp. When people come to us, I care about one outcome and one outcome alone. That they've got the architecture job that maybe gave them an extra $100,000 or $200,000, changes their life, makes them better be able to take care of their family, and gives them a job they love. That's my only goal. So if it takes you 6 months and you're hired, great, you won. If it takes you 10 months to get hired, great. If it takes you 2 years to get hired, and it shouldn't, but if it does, that's okay too. You're going to be in our program until the day you decide not to be, or you're hired. But getting certified is nothing. Getting hired is what we're concerned about. Everybody's got their focus on outcomes. Our competition is worried about certifications. That's why I teach certifications free. Because without the other stuff, that phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, there's no job. So that's why we do it that way. But we can definitely, and we would love to work with you, and we'd love the day that you tell me, just like Mr. Businessman had told me months ago, I'm hired, Mike. I got my first job and I love it. I hope that helps. Please join the webinar tomorrow, and I'm happy to clarify more. And I think that's actually the last question. Chris, can you give the time zone to Christian, who put the comment in the chat box? I think you already did, but just in case you did not, because it's hard for me to follow the chat box. And let me remind everyone that tomorrow we're going to have a fun conversation on how to become an enterprise architect at 2 p.m. Eastern time, which you can adjust for your local time zone. We'll go over the role. We'll talk about what we do, how to stand out, our proven method that gets people hired everywhere. And guess what? I'll answer any questions, evaluate your resume, LinkedIn profile, whatever we can. Time is yours. Just want to help you build your career. So sign up tomorrow. It's free. Take advantage of our 50% off if you desire to train with us. We're not always 50% off. We are for Labor Day. So take advantage of it and tell me. And I look forward to the day where you say, Mike, I'm hired. I spoke with a student of mine yesterday who's been in AWS for a couple of years. He's loving it. It was so excited to hear from people after the fact, and I hope that's you someday. So take care, everyone. If you had a good time, maybe like the video, maybe subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to be notified of new videos to assist you in your architecture career. And we have one almost